People said, "When you open the door for the devil came." It was true because she also opened that door for a devil. She was the one who brought that devil into her home. She saw her reflection in the broken mirror on the ground and laughed at her own reflection. A monster like herself laughed at herself. Her skin was pale, too pallid with bloodied scars on her forehead. Her face lost all its color. It now looked deathly thin. Her lips cracked, and blood dripped from the corners of her lips. Her hair looks greasy. She looks sickly. She turned around and looked out through the balcony of the 3rd floor to see the night sky. And what did she see there? The brightest star of all. A shining star so close that when she closed her eyes, she could almost touch it. But when she opened her eyes again, it was already gone. It had moved further away than ever before, and there was no way she would find it again. At the sound of the alarm, she got up in a panic. Drops of sweat glistened on her forehead. With trembling hands, she quickly wiped them off. She had not slept well for the past few months. Her mind raced with thoughts and fears about how she could kill someone. She quickly stumbled toward the bathroom, her eyes still half closed. She limped as she dragged herself into the bathroom. She glanced at her reflection, and her black orbs stared back at her. She noticed that her face was injured and bloodied, just like she had seen in her dreams. Her black hair was messy and the dust was visible. She quickly stepped into the shower, bracing herself for the cold water. Despite the initial shock, she felt invigorated and more alert. With every passing second, she became more aware of her surroundings. The pain subsided to a dull throbbing. She began feeling nauseous, as though her body was being torn apart. Images of lifeless bodies flashed before her eyes, and she instantly shook them off. She focused on washing her hair and scrubbing her body vigorously, trying to forget her nightmare. Her heart rate gradually slowed. As her shower continued, the image began playing in her head. The screams, cries, and chaos around her seemed to get farther and farther away until all she could see were her hands. A small scream escaped her lips as her skin began to change color, becoming paler, darker, and more grotesque. Blood began dripping everywhere. The scene changed to a familiar room. The bed was empty. A large mirror hung opposite the wall. Its surface reflected the dark night sky as the moonlight illuminated a portion of the room. In a far corner lay a figure covered in blood. An overpowering smell invaded her nostrils. Her vision blurred as darkness swallowed her. Her heartbeat accelerated, and her breathing became labored. She gripped her chest as she struggled to catch her breath. Sweat trickled down her temples as she leaned forward, clutching tightly onto the shower head as overwhelming fear crept up on her. She tried so hard to control her breathing, but it was impossible. She couldn't stop her breathing from growing irregularly. Every inhale felt more painful than the last. She squeezed her eyes shut in vain attempts to escape. The bathroom began spinning as she clutched harder onto the shower curtain, desperately wishing to hold onto something. Eventually, even with the strength of her hands, she began sliding toward the edge of the bathtub, until finally she toppled over the rim and plunged into icy cold water. After lying there for a few seconds, she quickly got up, coughing uncontrollably as the freezing spray stung her exposed face. She struggled to get her head above water as the cold water washed away her memories. She washed the blood from her face and cleaned her scars properly. She slipped into a formal swan-white shirt and beige pants. Before leaving the room, she concealed her scars so no one would ask about them. Honestly, she didn't know either. She headed downstairs, where the clattering of dishes and the enticing aroma of food filled the air. "Good morning, Mum," she greeted as she entered the kitchen. Her mother, Ms. Elizabeth, turned toward her and planted a kiss on her cheek. "Happy birthday, Blair," she said. Blair glanced at her, realizing that she had completely forgotten that today marked her 26th birthday. "Thank you, Mom," she expressed as she swiftly grabbed her beloved Americano coffee and began savoring its flavors. It was a day when she had to arrive at the office early, yet she found herself running behind schedule. Placing the now empty coffee mug on the table, she turned her gaze toward her mother, who was busy with something in the fridge. Ms. Elizabeth seemed to be on a quest for something specific. Eventually, she discovered what she had been seeking, a cupcake adorned with a delicate pink candle. Blair eagerly watched her mom, her eyes filled with excitement. With a smile on her face, she observed as Ms. Elizabeth placed the cupcake onto a small plate. Despite her forgetfulness in the morning rush, Ms. Elizabeth had not forgotten. She had a unique talent for turning even the most ordinary actions into something special. "Mom, I'm running late today. Our company's president, Ms. Charlotte, is coming, and I cannot afford to be tardy." "Ms. Charlotte? Why is she coming?" Blair glanced at her mom in astonishment, as she had told her last night that today was a very important day at the office. "Because today Mr. Ethan is taking charge of our Lopez Food Company as the new CEO," she replied. "Well, being 5 minutes late won't make a difference," Ms. Elizabeth said as she lit the candle on the cupcake. "I just wanted to ensure that you began your day with a small celebration." "Mom, thank you," she managed to say before quickly extinguishing the candle, slicing the cake, and offering a bite to her mother. She then hurried outside, devouring the remaining piece. The delectable sweetness of the frosting and the tender texture of the cake filled her mouth, evoking nostalgic memories of past birthdays and the happiness that always accompanied her mother's presence. As she joined the bustling crowd on the streets, the morning rush was in full swing. The air filled with the sound of cars honking and people chatting, creating a lively atmosphere. Upon entering the office, she noticed a significant change in the air. Everyone seemed to be in a frenzy, rushing around. In her haste, she accidentally bumped into someone. However, she quickly sat down and began organizing her bag, gathering all the scattered pages until they were neatly arranged and ready to be picked up. Suddenly, her phone started vibrating, prompting her to retrieve it from her pocket. It turned out to be yet another text message from Mason. "Why did you arrive so late, Blair?" Evelyn's voice interrupted her thoughts, causing her to put her phone away. "Yeah, I was late today. My eyes just refused to open early this morning," Blair replied, slightly amused. "Well, now the boss will make sure your eyes are wide open," Evelyn warned her in a serious tone. Evelyn had been her good friend since they met 4 years ago. She was in her late 20s, with bright brown eyes and dark hair styled in soft curls around her face. Her smile was perfect. When they met on that first day, they clicked instantly. They shared much more than just a great sense of humor. Their personalities meshed seamlessly. Blair often talked about her latest cake creations while Evelyn listened with a soft expression. They had similar tastes in music and movies, though Blair preferred indie over pop or hip-hop. They were equally passionate about books, which led Evelyn to share stories about her family's love for reading, even though she hadn't read much herself. "Why, what's going on? Where is the boss?" Blair inquired, feeling a sense of concern. "In her office," Evelyn replied, gesturing with her eyes. Blair glanced toward the glass door and saw her boss in a heated argument with William. She wore a form-fitting black pencil skirt, complemented by black silk stockings and matching high heels, along with an opulent crimson blouse adorned with sparkling diamond embellishments. As their eyes met through the reflective surface of the door, Blair noticed irritation etched on her face. Blair felt a pang of anxiety as she watched the scene unfold. It was unusual for the boss to reprimand William, a highly respected employee, so early in the day. Hastily arranging her belongings on her desk, Blair cautiously approached the office, hoping to avoid any scolding this morning. Upon entering the office, she felt the air thick with tension. William appeared visibly flustered and filled with remorse. Sitting behind her desk, Ms. Dorothy, the boss, wore a disappointed and frustrated expression. "William, how could you be so careless? Your mistake has cost us a major client in Singapore, resulting in billions of dollars in losses," Ms. Dorothy yelled at him. A knot formed in Blair's stomach as she considered the situation. William was known for his meticulousness and attention to detail. It was highly unusual for him to make such a significant mistake. Blair couldn't help but wonder what had gone wrong. "I understand, but I don't want to hear any excuses, William. This was a crucial account, and you were responsible for ensuring its success. Now we've lost not only a valuable client but also a significant amount of revenue. Ms. Dorothy's voice boomed, making Blair involuntarily flinch. Ms. Dorothy gestured for William to leave and then turned her attention towards Blair, her tone filled with frustration. Why on earth are you just standing there like a complete idiot? Blair felt a pang of envy as she watched Kaylee and Ms. Dorothy interact so seamlessly. It was hard not to compare herself to Kaylee, who seemed to effortlessly command the boss's approval. Blair shook her head, trying to push away the negative thoughts as she approached. "Hey, Kaylee," she said, forcing a smile. "How's everything going?" Kaylee turned, her expression brightening. "Almost ready. Just a few last-minute adjustments, and we'll be set for Miss Charlotte's arrival." Blair nodded, hoping her own nerves didn't show. "Do you need any help? I can assist with the decorations or refreshments." "That would be great," Kaylee replied, glancing back at Ms. Dorothy. "She's a bit stressed, and I could use another set of hands." Blair felt a small surge of relief. Maybe this was her chance to prove herself. As they moved together to the refreshments table, she quickly took stock of what was needed. "Do you know what Miss Charlotte prefers?" Blair asked, trying to sound casual. Kaylee shrugged, focusing on arranging the pastries. "She likes everything to be perfect. Presentation matters more than anything else. If it doesn't look right, you'll hear about it." Blair's stomach twisted at the thought. With her own pressures looming, the idea of failing in front of the new CEO was daunting. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that she could handle it. As they worked, the tension in the air became palpable. Employees rushed about, and the faint sound of cameras clicking hinted that the press was gathering outside. Blair caught a glimpse of Evelyn, who was already engaging with the reporters, her bright smile cutting through the chaos. "Let's make sure everything is set before they start streaming in," Kaylee said, snapping Blair back to reality. "Right, let's finish up," Blair agreed, focusing on her tasks. She wanted to make today memorable not just for Miss Charlotte, but for herself too. This was her chance to shine amidst the pressure. They finished arranging the final touches just as Ms. Dorothy emerged from her office, her demeanor still tense but slightly more composed. "Is everything ready?" she called out, scanning the room with an authoritative gaze. "Almost done, boss," Kaylee replied, straightening up. Blair felt her heart race as Ms. Dorothy approached them. "Make sure it's flawless," she said, her voice low but firm. "We can't afford any mistakes today." Blair nodded, determination flooding her. She would not let Ms. Dorothy down herself. As the final minutes ticked away, she could feel the weight of expectations resting heavily on her shoulders. But deep down she knew she was capable. Today had to be perfect. "I hoped you disappeared, Kaylee," Blair muttered, unsure if it was fueled by her envy or pure rage. She had always yearned to be the one standing by the boss's side, aiding and backing her up. At precisely 10 o'clock, Ethan Lopez entered the hallway, causing all the cameras to shift their focus onto him. He was the only child of the company's president, Ms. Charlotte Lopez, and the exclusive proprietor of Lopez Food Company, having recently finished his education in Australia. Amidst the bustling crowd, the sound of his footsteps went unnoticed. He possessed a captivating allure, with his slender frame, lustrous light brown hair, and piercing blue eyes, which he hid behind glasses. He held an air of enigma and charm. Clad in a black suit and gray tie, he exuded an aura of effortless elegance, accentuating his tan and emanating a distinct sense of cool sophistication. As he strolled down the aisle of the hall, where individuals sat in rows of red velvet chairs, he greeted each person with a charming smile. Blair couldn't help but think how perfect his life was. Just then, Mason's message appeared on her phone screen, snapping her back to reality. She tapped the screen to read his message. "Opulent Heights, Luxor Lodgings Hotel. Meeting, 10:30 p.m. Flashback. How long did you sit here in your dead mother's room, Charlotte? It had been a month since she died." She lifted her head upon hearing her father's voice, her eyes heavy with sorrow and weariness. The room remained untouched, adorned with her mother's possessions, as if it was trapped in a moment frozen in time. Once more, Charlotte turned her gaze towards her mother's photograph. Her mother's smile greeted her from the frame on her dresser. Her eyes wide open and filled with joy, devoid of any trace of pain or sadness. As her lengthy blonde hair was neatly tied up in a bun, it exposed the pallid complexion of her face, which had faded with the passing years. However, even in that moment, her beauty remained captivating. Charlotte felt tears forming within her, and she had to restrain them from streaming down her face. A soft sigh escaped her lips, the only sound in the silent house. Now that you are 8 months pregnant, you should not take too much stress in such a condition, her father advised her while sitting on a chair. Charlotte gently rubbed her swollen belly and sighed as she leaned back, feeling the weight of her growing baby inside her. "I know, Dad," she replied, trying to sound calm despite the anxiety that had built up inside her. "But I won't leave you alone, and Gabriel knew anyway, so he didn't mind me staying here." "And why would he have a problem with this?" Charlotte shrugged. Though she was a wife of Gabriel Hernandez, the owner of the Hernandez empire, she was also the sole heir of Lopez Food Company. While her businesses were smaller in scale, her influence over the food chain was far from negligible. Charlotte made sure to keep her father aware of this fact whenever possible, and he never failed to let her know how happy he was for his daughter. In fact, he often sent her expensive gifts when she was away from home. Even though he didn't mind, still these twins needed their father, and it was good for them to see their parents first as soon as they were born. Her father tried to convince her. After listening to him, Charlotte gently caressed her belly, feeling the tiny kicks of life within. She couldn't help but feel a surge of pride and responsibility. These unborn twins were not just any ordinary members of their family. They were destined to become the future heirs of the Hernandez Empire and Lopez Food Company. Charlotte imagined the day when their soon-to-be-born twins would take their first steps, their tiny feet leaving imprints on the same ground that their father had once walked. They would grow up under Gabriel's watchful eye, learning the ways of their family and understanding the importance of unity, loyalty, and respect. Keeping both things in mind, Charlotte decided to go back to the Hernandez mansion. The rain poured down heavily outside. It dawned on her that exactly 1 year ago that day, she had tied the knot with Gabriel amidst a similar downpour. "Stop, don't go alone in such weather. The driver will drop you," her father said, showing his concern. She replied, "I'll be fine, don't worry," as she sat in the car. She felt a wave of eagerness and nostalgia as the automobile began to move. Raindrops flowed down the window, making it difficult to see the familiar buildings and streets. Her mind filled with memories of that soggy wedding day, which made her grin. How content they were at that time together, and how she longed to simply return to those times, feeling she would never regain. She pulled her coat tight over her torso as she got out of the car, the rain pelting down. With a sense of grandeur and majesty, the Hernandez Palace towered above her. She could hear the distant sounds of the bustling metropolis, which created a haunting yet alluring atmosphere. As she stepped through the mansion's doors, the smell of pine and damp soil filled the air, making her feel at ease and nostalgic. In the corridor, she ran into Liam Cadell, Gabriel's personal driver, and asked him where her husband was. Since it was an odd hour, Liam seemed taken aback to see her there at that particular time. "Ma'am, if you wanted to return, you should have informed me beforehand, and I would have personally fetched you." But because of the erratic fluctuations in her pregnancy mood, it was difficult for her to stay in the moment and talk to him. Therefore, ignoring what he had said, she asked, "Where can I look for him?" "Gabriel has gone to the city for a meeting," informed their housekeeper Ella, who had most likely stopped by to listen. "Why is he having a meeting at this time?" Charlotte exclaimed, taken aback. It was unusual for him to go to the city for meetings, especially in the evening. Trying to conceal her anxiety, she asked, "Do you know when he'll be back?" She was really surprised. Ella paused for a moment before responding, "I'm not certain. He didn't mention the time of his meeting. Usually, when something like this happens, he doesn't return home at night." "What do you mean by he doesn't return home? And what are those meetings that go on late into the night?" Charlotte inquired, raising her voice a bit to get Liam's attention. He averted his gaze in response. Charlotte had already grasped the meaning behind his gesture. "How long had this been going on?" she asked. "For about a month now, ma'am," Ella responded. Curiosity and anxiety consumed her as she persisted. "What was the purpose of these meetings?" Charlotte's voice quivered slightly. She craved immediate answers, and she couldn't wait any longer. Liam let out a deep sigh, his posture drooping. "Ma'am, we cannot disclose this information to you. It is for your own protection." Charlotte felt disappointed after hearing what he had to say. Security. What could happen to my protection? She had always regarded herself as a valued part of this family, leading a typical life. But it seemed there was another world, one she was unaware of. Ella approached, her expression filled with worry. "Ma'am, we never intended to withhold this information from you, but the situation forced our hand. It was in your best interest to stay unaware." Charlotte vehemently disagreed, feeling a surge of frustration. "Shut up, you are nobody to tell me what is right and what is wrong. I have the right to know what's happening. I have the right to be involved in whatever is unfolding." Charlotte went back by herself, without consulting anyone or following their advice. Although she was unaware of his meetings, she knew the place they frequently visited, which was his flat. She briefly forgot that she had two lives inside her as she raced through the downpour. After an hour's trip, she felt overcome with anxiety as she stood in front of a stunning apartment. She exhaled deeply, trying to clear her mind before going into the flat. Knowing its digital lock, she punched in the code with ease, and the door opened. She closed the door behind her and paused to look around. The living room was dark, and the silence was deafening, making her thoughts race through her head. She looked at the open door to her bedroom, where she and Gabriel had once slept. She heard faint whispers coming from inside. A dim source of light appeared as a soft glow filtered through the half-open door. She moved stealthily toward the room, taking care to avoid making a sound. Disbelief overcame her as she looked through the small opening and saw what was happening. She saw her husband with another woman. They laughed at something while drinking and enjoying their so-called meetings. Charlotte felt disgusted, as if it were somehow her fault that they were together. Rage consumed every part of her body. Her hands trembled violently, and she felt hot tears fill her eyes. The room that once held cherished memories of love now felt like a betrayal. Anger surged through her veins, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from the painful sight. The woman's laughter echoed in the room, mocking the love they once shared. How could Gabriel do this to me? Gabriel, the person I trusted and loved, gave me this heart-wrenching pain. Questions swirled in her mind, each one more painful than the last. They were planning something, and Charlotte wanted to hear, so she leaned further and listened to her nightmare. "Now I really got tired of her and felt trapped in this marriage, but I didn't know the way out," Gabriel said as he held her hand. "Then just get rid of her," that woman replied as she took a sip from her glass. "Get rid? Just like you planned to get rid of her parents," she shrugged. "Not to mention you already killed her mother." "But I can't kill her now. I mean, she is pregnant with my twins." Gabriel looked quite concerned. "As if you wanted them under..." "Yeah, but I wanted Lopez Food Company shares. If I killed her now, we might lose those shares. So we have to wait till next year." Gabriel poured another glass of wine for himself. "Next year," that woman exclaimed. Her eyes pierced into his soul. "You wanted me to wait that long?" "No, baby, I don't want you to wait." Gabriel stood up from his seat and walked towards her. "But who will raise them?" He pulled her in his embrace and took a quick peck on her lips. "I don't want to burden you. I can raise those kids, but close this chapter as soon as possible," that woman growled. Charlotte mustered all her remaining courage and pushed the door open, making it squeak loudly. The faint light made it hard to see the woman's face. Or perhaps Charlotte was just trying to draw their attention to herself. When Gabriel and the woman suddenly turned to face her, their expressions a mixture of surprise and shock, a thick stillness fell over the room. The woman was none other than her best friend, Sarah. Felt like her world was spinning. Everything blurred before her eyes as she tried to process what had happened. She didn't know when it all started between them, but witnessing them together in that moment suggested they had been acquainted for quite some time. Sarah and Charlotte had been friends since childhood. They shared everything from their deepest secrets to their wildest dreams, but she never imagined sharing her husband. She never imagined that her best friend would be the one to stab her in the back. Tears welled up in her eyes, blurring her vision as Charlotte struggled to find her voice. "How could you?" she managed to choke out, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and anger. Charlotte had often heard her husband speak of Sarah, praising her intelligence and beauty at various gatherings. She had always brushed it off as mere admiration for a dear friend, never suspecting that something deeper was going on. The impact of realization struck her like a thunderbolt, sending shockwaves of emotion through her body. How oblivious she had been. The signs had been right in front of her, like a door to her ignorance. The covert late-night conversations, the furtive gazes they shared when they thought nobody was observing it, all became crystal clear in that moment, and Charlotte was astounded by her previous lack of perception. Her sight grew hazy, and she heard nothing except static as a wave of dizziness swept through her mind. Her knees gave out. She felt someone hold her arms before the ground rushed up to meet her face. Later, she regained consciousness in the hospital, only to see a distressing sight beside her bed. Her only son. Charlotte sat up abruptly and immediately searched for her other son, but he was nowhere to be found. Panic took hold as she desperately scoured every corner of the hospital room. He wasn't there. What else might he be? What if someone had taken him? Charlotte thought feverishly. As she stood up, she felt her heart pounding frantically against her chest and her legs growing numb. How much had he wept before being taken away? Didn't someone have the ability to assist him? Was he now all right? Now, what should we do to this, Charlotte? She suddenly overheard Sarah speaking to Gabriel in a hushed tone from behind the closed door. Gabriel let out a deep sigh, his voice filled with animosity. What should we do? Just increase her medication dosage. Charlotte strained to listen to their discussion. And what about that second child? Sarah asked, unknowingly causing Charlotte to instinctively reach out toward her son's bed. Gabriel's words pierced her ears. How much harm could a deceased child cause? A shiver ran down Charlotte's spine as his revelation settled in. The atmosphere in the hospital room became stifling, making it difficult for her to breathe. The weight of his disclosure bore down on her chest, almost suffocating her. However, the thunderous applause forced her to bury her painful memories in the depths of the past. She saw Ethan standing on stage, addressing the press. The president of this company, Miss Charlotte Lopez. He gazed at his mother with a smile. She is not only my mother but also a remarkable woman who single-handedly established Lopez Food Company with my grandfather. Throughout her life, she has been a source of strength and independence, and she holds great admiration for me. Now, the time has come for me to assume the responsibility of being the successor of our family business. Charlotte was a middle-aged woman who still looked young despite her age. Her blonde hair was tied in a neat bun at the back of her head. She had blue eyes that resembled the sky, just like her son's. The color of her skin contrasted with the paleness of her features, clear like an apple. She wore an elegant dress made of the finest material and embellished with gold thread. Several rings sparkled on each of her fingers in the light of her room. A single golden chain lay around her neck, resembling the sun, shining above her shoulder as it glowed and reflected the white ceiling of the room. She looked at the camera with a smile on her face, her blue eyes twinkling. As soon as the speech ended, Miss Charlotte boldly picked up her bag and headed for her son's office, following the bright flashes from the cameras. He started his work there that day. She felt the importance of that moment as she made her way through the bustling crowd of reporters and photographers. Upon entering the office, Miss Charlotte quickly dropped the phony grin and looked at Kaylee gravely. She understood Miss Charlotte's quiet message instantly and gave a subtle nod of recognition. She shifted the multimedia images with a quick flick of her fingers. Sir, our net profit from 2005 to 2022 was $247 million. However, as of the start of this year, our shares experienced a 15% decrease compared to the previous year. Kaylee reported. Ethan paid close attention, his face displaying concern. What could have caused this huge decline, he inquired. In response, Kaylee said, our industry was impacted by several issues. First, our market share was affected by increased competition. Second, our profitability was also impacted by adverse economic conditions, such as growing inflation and higher production costs. Last but not least, there were issues with our business's capacity to adjust to shifting customer tastes and technological developments. Ethan sighed, realizing the gravity of the situation. We needed to take immediate action to reverse this trend. What strategies did you suggest we implement? It was quite challenging to take action at that time, Kaylee responded. Why was it so tough? Kaylee glanced at Ms. Charlotte in response to Ethan's question. Because, Ms. Charlotte replied, initiating the discussion. We received anonymous messages from an unknown sender who seemed to be targeting the companies associated with us. This individual actively took steps to conceal their identity. Anonymous messages. Ethan frowned. Some expired food products were sold under our company's label. As a result, people who consumed them experienced food poisoning. This information was reported to the food inspection authorities, who then sent the food items to the lab for testing. Yesterday, we received the test results. Why didn't you inform me about everything that happened? It appeared to be a significant instance of defamation and harassment, Ethan interjected, interrupting Miss Charlotte. Since you were in Australia, I didn't want you to get affected. Ethan inquired. Did the reports arrive from the lab? Yes, and they found a large amount of salmonella in our food products, Ms. Charlotte responded. Did you conduct a thorough investigation, Ms. President? I had already informed the authorities, Ms. Charlotte said thoughtfully. But you know these types of investigations took time, so we couldn't do anything but wait. She took a deep breath. Sir, I prepared a statement that we could issue once we had a better grasp of the situation, Kaylee responded. Ethan nodded, clearly upset by the situation. He never expected such a welcome in the business world. Miss Charlotte, tonight you had a scheduled meeting with a delegate from Singapore at the Grand Oasis Hotel. Kaylee informed her about her next schedule. From now on, the new CEO of Lopez Food Company will handle all business matters, Ms. Charlotte stated, directing her attention toward her son. Reschedule the meeting at the Luxor Lodgings Hotel instead of the Grand Oasis, Ethan instructed. And what time, sir? Kaylee inquired. 10:30 p.m., Ethan said before leaving the meeting room with Ms. Charlotte. At precisely 11:45 p.m., a young woman tragically plummeted from the highest floor of the Luxor Lodgings Hotel. The atmosphere enveloped in stillness was interrupted only by the faint hum of passing vehicles and sporadic wails of sirens. Oblivious to the unfolding calamity above, the hotel guests remained blissfully unaware. However, as the girl's lifeless form violently collided with the unforgiving pavement below, a collective gasp reverberated throughout the premises. The sheer force of the impact shattered the tranquility of the night, compelling heads to swivel and hearts to quicken their pace. Panic erupted as individuals hurried outside, desperately trying to comprehend the recent events. Whose penthouse was that? A voice echoed. It belonged to Ethan Lopez, the new CEO of Lopez Food Company. 3 hours earlier, Opulent Heights. At 9 p.m., Ethan sat in his penthouse, Opulent Heights. He wore black jeans, sneakers, and a white turtleneck sweater, listening to something on his hands-free device. His hair was slightly tousled from the breeze coming in through the open window, and he leaned on one arm with his legs crossed on the sofa. Without his blue contact lenses and eyeglasses, he looked different, sipping his Chateau Lafite 1869 wine. His gaze was fixed on the wall clock, as if waiting for someone to arrive. He seemed quiet, calm, and relaxed. Suddenly the doorbell rang. He took out his phone and typed a few words to Kaylee before heading to open the door. 4 individuals entered the room, all dressed in black suits and wearing stern, serious expressions. One of them tightly clutched a briefcase, as if it held something of great significance. The others positioned themselves in a formation, their eyes fixed on their leader. "Welcome, Mr. Thomas Martinez," Ethan chuckled, introducing one of them and warmly shaking his hand. "I hope I'm not bothering you, Mr. Ethan Lopez," Thomas smiled back. They both walked toward the sofa where Ethan had been seated. Thomas was a middle-aged man, tall and slender but still muscular. He had long sideburns framing his clean-shaven face, and his short hair seemed styled with gel. His dark skin was smooth and glossy, and he wore a silver necklace that glistened under the light. He worked for Ethan, handling all his illegal activities and underground business, and Ethan had given him considerable freedom to operate. "The meeting will be scheduled for next week," Thomas began. "We have important news to announce to you."